We have sad news to report out of the film industry tonight. Actress Hayden Panettiere has died.
Hayden Panettiere died on August 16, 2026, just 5 days shy of her 37th birthday. And the news moved through Hollywood and through millions of homes almost instantly. Her father released a short statement that most outlets ran word for word, calling her an incredible light and a force of nature who brought immeasurable love and joy to everyone who knew her, both personally and through the screen. Behind that brief message is a much longer story. An estate reportedly worth somewhere between roughly $12 and $15 million, a young daughter growing up across the ocean from her, and a family that had already buried one child years before this second devastating loss. So what exactly does Hayden Panettiere leave behind? And how did a life that started before she could even walk end so suddenly at 36? Let's go through it. The news broke on a Sunday evening in mid-August. Panettiere's representative confirmed to multiple outlets, including ABC News, that she had died at 36. According to the Greenville County Coroner's Office in South Carolina, first responders were called to a residence around 1:50 in the afternoon after a 911 call reporting an unresponsive woman in cardiac arrest. Emergency crews attempted advanced life support measures on scene, but she could not be revived, and she was pronounced dead early that afternoon. Some outlets reported that the original dispatch communications referenced a possible overdose, though authorities were careful to note that a dispatcher's description during an emergency call is not the same thing as a confirmed medical finding, and no official cause has been tied to that detail. An autopsy was carried out the following day. The coroner's office stated publicly that the exam turned up no signs of trauma that could have contributed to her death, and that the official cause and manner would remain pending further toxicology work and additional studies. The Greenville Police Department, working alongside the coroner's office, said its preliminary investigation had not turned up any indication of foul play or suspicious circumstances, language that has since been repeated across nearly every follow-up story without much additional detail attached to it. What made the timing especially jarring for people who had followed her closely is that she had spent much of the spring doing the opposite of hiding. She was on a genuine press tour, sitting for podcasts and daytime interviews to promote a new memoir. And by most accounts, she sounded steadier and more self-possessed than she had in years. That contrast, a woman who appeared to be standing on solid ground, gone so abruptly only a few months later, is a large part of why the story spread so quickly across entertainment outlets, news networks, and social platforms that don't usually move in lockstep on the same celebrity story. Reports also noted that she had reportedly traveled from Los Angeles to the Greenville, South Carolina area the day before her death, with her on-again, off-again boyfriend, actor Brian Hickerson, reported to have been in the area around the same time. Her publicist told reporters simply that an investigation was ongoing, a phrase that has since been repeated in dozens of headlines with little further clarification. Reaction from the entertainment world came almost immediately. Actress Viola Davis, who worked with Panettiere on the 2016 film Custody, posted a tribute describing her as someone she wished the world had gotten more time with, using the image of a phoenix rising from ashes to describe watching her push through hardship. Coverage from NBC News and The Hollywood Reporter noted that former co-stars from Bring It On, Heroes, and Nashville all posted messages of their own that same night. Guest star Britt Shaw, who appeared on Nashville, wrote about how Panettiere had a way of making people feel instantly at home on set. Allison Stoner, who later took over voicing Kyrie in the Kingdom Hearts games after Panettiere originated the role, posted an emotional tribute referencing their shared character. SAG-AFTRA also issued a public statement mourning her passing and noting her long career in television and film. Vladimir Klitschko, the father of her daughter, released his own statement saying she left the world far too soon and pledging to keep her memory alive for their child. Reports in the days after her death noted that other well-known names, including Rosie O'Donnell, also posted public tributes, joining a wave of reaction that spanned generations of television and film. What stood out to a number of people who worked alongside her, whether on a soundstage decades ago or on a film set in just the last few years, was how often the word warmth came up. Several people connected to Nashville specifically described a habit she reportedly had of remembering small personal details about the people around her, Names of crew members' kids, where someone grew up, what someone was going through that week, the kind of thing that rarely shows up in a highlight reel, but that tends to be what people actually remember about a person once they're gone. To understand why the loss landed so hard across so many different corners of pop culture, daytime soap fans, superhero show fans, country music fans, horror franchise fans, even video game fans who never watched a single episode of television she was in, it helps to go back to the beginning of a career that started before she could form full sentences. Hayden Leslie Panettiere was born on August 21, 1989, in Palisades, New York. Her mother, Leslie Vogel, was a former soap opera actress who went on to help manage her daughter's early career, and her father, Alan Skip Panettiere, worked as a firefighter. She landed her very first commercial before she was even a year old, and by age 4 she already had a recurring role on the ABC daytime drama, One Life to Live. A couple of years after that, she moved to the soap Guiding Light, where her character's storyline involving leukemia earned the young actress a special recognition from a leukemia and lymphoma advocacy organization, a small detail that rarely comes up in modern retrospectives, but that shaped how some of her earliest audiences connected with her. Her film career picked up through the late 1990s and early 2000s. She voiced Princess in Pixar's A Bug's Life, played a supporting role opposite Denzel Washington in Remember the Titans, and spent her early teenage years bouncing between family-friendly films like Ice Princess and Raising Helen. None of that quite prepared audiences for 2006, when a 15-year-old cheerleader with the ability to heal from almost any injury turned her into a household name virtually overnight. Playing Claire Bennett on NBC's Heroes kept her on primetime television for 4 seasons, and the cheerleader storyline became so central to how the show was marketed that her face reportedly ended up on more merchandise than any other cast members, including the actors playing the show's more central characters. When Heroes ended in 2010, she moved into the role of Juliette Barnes, a talented and famously ruthless country star on the musical drama Nashville, which ran on ABC and later CMT for 6 seasons and earned her 2 Golden Globe nominations. Fans speculated for years that the Juliette Barnes character was loosely modeled on real country artists of the era, something Panettiere pushed back on directly more than once, insisting the role wasn't based on any single performer despite the constant online comparisons. She later stepped into the Scream franchise as Kirby Reed, appearing in Scream 4 and returning for Scream 6 more than a decade afterward. She lent her voice to Kairi across the Kingdom Hearts video game series, introducing her to an entirely different generation of fans who had no connection to her television work, and voiced Kate in the animated film Alpha and Omega. Her final credited role came earlier this year in the direct-to-video thriller Sleepwalker, a quiet ending point for a career that stretched more than 3 decades and touched nearly every format the entertainment industry offers: daytime soaps, network prestige drama, horror franchises, and animated video games. What made her run on Heroes so unusual in hindsight is how much of the show's cultural footprint ended up tied to a single catchphrase associated with her character: "Save the cheerleader, save the world," a line that outlived the show itself by nearly 2 decades and still shows up in nostalgia pieces and best of 2000s television lists long after most of the series' other storylines faded from public memory. Her transition from that role into a musical drama built around original country songwriting was, by most accounts at the time, considered a genuine risk, since it meant asking audiences to accept her as a singer as much as an actress. The show leaned into that risk rather than softening it, having her perform live vocals rather than relying on a double, and critics who covered Nashville during its run frequently singled out her performance as one of the more surprising reinventions on television at the time. That willingness to be recast so completely, from a healing teenage cheerleader to a hard-edged, emotionally volatile country star a few years later, is part of why so many different casting directors kept coming back to her over the following decade, even as her personal life became increasingly public. Her formal schooling ended relatively early. She moved to private tutoring starting around 9th grade after attending South Orangetown Middle School, a common path for young performers, but one that left her without many of the traditional milestones her peers experienced. She has said in past interviews that she once considered stepping away from acting for a period to pursue more traditional education before the momentum of Heroes made that plan impossible. Her family also traced some of its roots to Italy, along with English and German ancestry, a heritage she referenced occasionally when asked about her surname, which is commonly mispronounced by fans and translates roughly to baker in Italian. Estimates of her financial worth at the time of her death varied fairly widely, generally landing somewhere between roughly $12 and $15 million, depending on which source is cited, a range wide enough to say something about how imprecise celebrity net worth estimates tend to be once you move past a single headline salary figure. The bulk of that fortune is generally traced back to her long run on Nashville, supplemented by her years on Heroes, her work in the Scream franchise, her voice acting, and years spent as a face for brands including Neutrogena, Candies, Kohl's, and Dooney and Burke, for whom she once helped design a limited edition handbag. That range of estimates has floated around for years, moving up or down depending on which valuation site published the number and when, which is fairly typical for actors whose peak earning years happened a decade or more before their death, and who largely stopped discussing their finances publicly once their highest profile show ended. Unlike some of her peers from the same era of teen and young adult stardom, she never built out a visible business empire of her own. No clothing line, no beauty brand, no production company with her name attached, which likely kept her fortune closer to what she actually earned on screen rather than inflated by outside ventures. Most of the reporting around her estate in the days after her death focused less on a precise dollar figure and more on the emotional weight of who that estate would ultimately support. An 11-year-old daughter being raised on another continent, and parents who had already lost one child and were now facing the legal and financial process of settling the affairs of another. But long before any of that financial picture fully took shape, an 18-year-old Panettiere was already spending her public platform on something far riskier than a brand partnership. In October 2007, acting as spokesperson for a marine conservation campaign, she joined Sea Shepherd activists paddling into a cove in Taiji, Japan, in an attempt to disrupt the town's annual dolphin hunt. Local fishermen pushed the activists back toward shore, and the confrontation was later captured in the cove, the documentary that went on to win the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. She returned to Taiji again in 2010, this time with Klitschko, in an unsuccessful attempt to meet with local officials about the hunt. Her activism extended beyond that single high-profile trip. She delivered protest letters to foreign ambassadors calling for an end to commercial whaling, spoke at a conservation event in Alaska, where she drew a distinction between commercial whaling and traditional Aboriginal hunting practices, adopted a vegetarian diet, and joined the celebrity board of a children's charity connected to Ronald McDonald House. She also became known among fans for a small tattoo intended to read as a phrase meaning "live without regrets" in Italian, though the wording was famously misspelled, a detail that resurfaced repeatedly in tribute posts after her death as a strangely fitting footnote to a life that rarely seemed to slow down. It's worth pausing on how unusual that kind of activism was for someone her age at the time. She was still a teenager balancing a full-time television schedule when she started using her name to draw attention to marine conservation, well before celebrity activism became the kind of career branding move it's often treated as today. Getting physically pushed back from a beach by local fishermen, and later facing reports of a foreign arrest warrant tied to the protest, wasn't the kind of publicity a young actress's team would typically encourage, and it put her in a very different category from most of her peers on network television at the time. She never fully stepped away from that side of her public life either. Even years later, well into her run on Nashville, interviewers would occasionally bring up the Taiji trip, and she tended to speak about it not as a career footnote, but as one of the things she was proudest of doing with the platform fame had given her. Panettiere's most significant long-term relationship began in 2009 with Ukrainian heavyweight boxing champion Vladimir Klitschko, whom she met at an event tied to a photography book they had both been featured in. The two broke up and reconciled more than once before getting engaged in October 2013. In December 2014, she gave birth to their daughter, Kaya Evdokia Klitschko, in Hawaii. The relationship eventually ended, and in 2018 Panettiere made what she publicly described as an incredibly difficult decision, relinquishing primary custody of Kaya to Klitschko while she sought treatment for alcoholism, substance abuse, and severe postpartum depression. Kaya, now 11, has spent most of her life living with her father in Europe rather than in the United States. Panettiere spoke about the arrangement in interviews years later, saying her daughter always knew she had two parents who loved her, and describing their bond as close and intense despite the distance, built on video calls that went well beyond small talk. Her decision to speak openly about postpartum depression